The day I crossed that invisible line into the United States, I left behind more than just my family and my country. I left behind my name, my past, my identity. I became someone else, or at least I tried to. Because in a country where your worth is measured by the papers you carry, I had none. Just a backpack with 2 shirts, $27 in my pocket, and a name I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to say out loud again. I was 19. Michoacan was dry and bitter that year. My father's crops had failed for the 3rd season in a row. My little sister needed medicine we couldn't afford, and my mother cried in silence every night after dinner. We pretended not to hear her. Hunger changes people. So I left, like so many others, not because I wanted to chase some American dream, but because I was tired of watching everything I loved fall apart. The desert welcomed me with its cruel honesty. It didn't lie to me like people did. It burned, it hurt, it punished, but at least I knew what to expect. I crossed with 6 others. One didn't make it. His name was Julio. He was 17, asthmatic, and we buried him with our bare hands under a mesquite tree somewhere near Nogales. No one ever speaks about the ones who don't make it, but I never forgot him. When I finally reached San Diego, my feet were bleeding, my lips cracked from dehydration, and I hadn't eaten in 2 days. But I was alive, and that had to count for something. My first job was cleaning bathrooms at a gas station. They paid me in cash, under the table, $20 a night. I slept behind the building on a piece of cardboard for 2 weeks. I wasn't ashamed. I had made it to America. That was supposed to mean something. I worked like a ghost, invisible during the day, alive only when the streets emptied. Mornings were for scrubbing floors, afternoons for collecting bottles and cans, nights for washing dishes at a greasy diner on El Cajon Boulevard. I barely slept. I didn't need to. Survival kept me awake. Every dollar I saved went to my family. I remember folding the bills slowly, one by one, placing them inside envelopes with shaking hands. I'd walk 5 miles to the nearest Western Union and wait in line behind other ghosts like me. We never talked, just exchanged glances that said, "I know why you're here." We always knew. There was a strange beauty in those early days, painful but honest. You learn to appreciate the smallest victories when the world wants you erased. Like the first time someone called me by my name and smiled, or the first time a stranger handed me a plate of food without expecting anything in return. After 3 months, I found work as a gardener. A man named Mr. Harris took a chance on me. He didn't ask for papers, just said, "Can you handle the sun?" I nodded. I was born in the sun. I knew it better than anyone. His backyard was a jungle of thorns and dead branches, but I saw potential. After 2 weeks, he offered me steady work, 5 days a week, $60 a day. I cried in his shed the first time he paid me. I hadn't held that much money since I left home. It was during those days that I began to feel human again. I rented a small room in a house with 6 other men. We shared a bathroom, a kitchen, and our stories. They were always the same. A mother waiting in Guatemala, a child in El Salvador, a debt unpaid in Honduras. We were all running from something, all chasing a life we might never fully hold. I decorated my corner of the room with photos, my sister's school portrait, my mother holding a basket of tortillas, my father, stiff and proud in his faded cowboy hat. Every night I whispered promises to them, that I'd send more, that I'd never let them down, that their sacrifices would be worth it. And slowly, I began to believe in that promise. I'd pass by families on sidewalks and wonder what it felt like to walk freely, to laugh without fear. I envied their ease, the way they existed without apology. I didn't want riches, just their right to be seen. That was the hardest part. Not the work, not the hunger, not even the fear. It was the invisibility, the way people looked through you, like you were part of the pavement, like your struggle was background noise. One afternoon, I was mowing a lawn when a little boy ran up to me. Blonde hair, freckles, maybe 5 years old. He looked me straight in the eye and asked, "Are you a bad guy?" His mom froze. I smiled gently and said, "No, I just make the grass look pretty." He nodded solemnly, then handed me a popsicle. That moment still lives in my heart. A child saw me. That was all I needed that day. Years went by. I moved from house to house, job to job, city to city. But I never stopped working, never stopped sending money home. My sister got into college. My parents renovated their kitchen. They'd call me once a week and say, "We're so proud of you." And I'd smile and say I was fine, even when I wasn't. Then, one day, I met someone, a woman named Emily. She wasn't like the others. She listened. She asked about my life, my dreams, my fears. She told me she didn't care about my papers. That love was bigger than laws. I wanted to believe her. I needed to, because after so many years alone, someone finally saw me. That's when everything changed. If you've ever felt like the world was built to keep you out, if you've ever swallowed your truth just to survive another day, I see you. And I want you to know, this space, this channel, is for people like us. Subscribe and share your story in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. You never know who might find comfort in your voice. Now, let me tell you what happened after Emily came into my life. It started with coffee, not the kind brewed in fancy machines with foreign names, but the kind poured by calloused hands at 6 a.m. in a quiet corner of a diner off University Avenue. I was cleaning tables, wiping down menus sticky from syrup and spilled creamer, when I first saw her, Emily. She was sitting alone, staring out the window like the world outside no longer made sense to her. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She just sipped her coffee with slow, careful hands, like every sip held back a secret she wasn't ready to tell. She came back the next day and the next, always alone, always ordering the same thing, black coffee and scrambled eggs, barely touched. After a week, I started refilling her cup before she asked. She looked up at me then, really
Said,
looked.
"You remember?"
I nodded. It's my job. But it wasn't just that. There was something about her silence that felt familiar, like the kind I carried in my own bones. I learned her name before I knew her story. Emily, mid-30s, wore the same denim jacket almost every day. She had a tired grace, like someone who had learned to smile through disappointments. One morning, she sat at the counter and said, "You always work this early?" I laughed. "I always work." She smiled for the first time, and I swear the room warmed up just a little. It didn't take long for conversation to stretch beyond coffee. She told me she had a son, Jacob, 2 years old. His father had left before he was born. No support, no goodbye, just vanished. "Sometimes I wonder if Jacob's better off without him," she said, staring at the sugar packet she kept crumbling between her fingers. I didn't say anything. I just nodded. Some wounds don't need words, just company. I didn't plan on falling in love. Love wasn't something people like me got to have. Not the kind that stayed, not the kind that healed. But Emily wasn't like anyone I'd ever met. She didn't ask me about my papers. She didn't care that my English wasn't perfect, or that I took the bus everywhere, or that I rented a room smaller than her kitchen. She just cared that I showed up, that I listened, that I laughed with Jacob, and made him giggle when I pretended to fall every time he tossed a toy at my head. The first time I held Jacob, he reached for my face and said, "Papi." Emily froze. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't his father. But in that moment, something shifted inside me. I had crossed deserts and borders, worked endless hours, sacrificed everything. But nothing prepared me for the way that word made me feel. I didn't correct him. I just held him tighter. Emily invited me into their lives like someone opening a window after years of stale air. We spent weekends at the park, watching Jacob chase pigeons and fall into piles of leaves. At night, we'd sit on the porch while he slept and talk about nothing and everything. She told me about her childhood in Fresno, about how her mom had died young and her father drank too much, about how she never planned on being a single mother, about how tired she was of pretending to be strong. I told her about my sister, about how I missed her laugh and how I used to braid her hair before school. I told her about the time I stole mangoes from the neighbor's tree and got chased with a broom. I told her about the first time I saw snow in Utah and cried because it looked too perfect to be real. I didn't tell her everything, not yet, but I told her enough. One night, after Jacob had fallen asleep with his tiny hand wrapped around my finger, Emily looked at me and said, "I think I trust you more than anyone I've ever known." I wanted to tell her the same, but trust, for people like me, is a fragile thing. One misstep, one question too many, and it all comes crashing down. Still, I let myself believe that maybe this was it. The life I had crossed the border for, the family I never thought I deserved. We moved in together 6 months later. It wasn't fancy, A two-bedroom apartment with creaky floors and a heater that groaned in the winter. But it was ours. I painted Jacob's room sky blue and glued glow-in-the-dark stars to the ceiling. Every night, he'd point at them and say, "Look, Poppy, the sky is inside." We cooked dinner together, took turns, putting Jacob to bed, shared bills, shared stories, shared silences. Emily would rest her head on my chest and say, "I don't know what we'd do without you." And I'd smile, holding her, thinking, "You'll never have to find out." But there were things I noticed. Small things. Documents Emily kept locked away. Phone calls she ended quickly when I entered the room. A photograph she kept in a drawer, face down, of her holding a newborn with a man I'd never seen. When I asked, she'd say, "Just someone from a long time ago." I believed her, or maybe I wanted to. We started talking about the future, maybe getting married, maybe applying for legal residency. Emily said, "If anyone deserves to stay, it's you." I laughed it off, but deep down, I dreamed of it. Not for me, for Jacob. For the nights I'd wake up afraid that I'd be taken away and he'd never know why. I didn't want to be a memory he outgrew. So we started the paperwork, talked to a lawyer, filled out forms, took pictures, paid fees I could barely afford. The lawyer looked at our case and said, "It's not perfect, but it's possible." That word, possible, became our hope. And yet, through it all, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't being said, that there was a part of Emily's past she hadn't shared. I didn't push. I figured we all carry scars we're not ready to reveal. But sometimes, what we hide can tear everything apart. Love, when it's real, makes you believe in things you thought were forever lost, like belonging, like safety, like family. That's what I felt with Emily and Jacob, like I had finally arrived home. Not the one I left behind, but the one I never knew I needed. If you've ever loved someone so deeply, it made you forget your own fears. If you've ever built a home with your bare hands and a borrowed heart, I'd love to hear your story. Drop a comment below, and if this touched something in you, don't forget to subscribe. Here, every story matters, especially the ones built in silence and sacrifice. Everything I knew about love and trust was about to be tested in ways I could never imagine. It was a Tuesday morning when we walked into the immigration office holding hands, trying to act like everything was normal. The air smelled like fear, not mine, hers. Emily's fingers trembled inside mine, her smile too wide, too rehearsed. We had been preparing for weeks, gathering photos, documents, joint bank statements, rent receipts, letters from neighbors, anything that could prove we were a real couple, that we loved each other, that our life was not just a paper story. Our lawyer, a middle-aged woman named Clara, met us at the door. She had eyes like steel and a voice that didn't flinch. "Keep your answers short. Don't volunteer more than they ask. And whatever happens, stay calm." Emily nodded, barely blinking. I tried to steady her. "We'll be fine," I whispered. But even as I said it, something inside me pulled tight. The interview room was cold. Metal chairs, fluorescent lights, a large folder already waiting on the table. The officer who called us in barely looked up. His nameplate read, "Ems Sandoval." He had the tired eyes of someone who had seen too many lies, too many stories that didn't quite fit. He motioned us to sit and flipped through our file like he was scanning for cracks. He started with Emily. Simple questions at first. "Where did you meet? How long have you lived together? What's his favorite food?" She answered quickly, maybe too quickly. When he turned to me, I stayed calm, told the truth. The name of Jacob's pediatrician, the color of Emily's toothbrush, the scent of her shampoo, jasmine and vanilla. I noticed everything because I loved her. Then came the photos, dozens of them. Birthdays, park days, Christmas mornings, all real, all filled with Jacob's laughter and Emily's sleepy eyes, and me, always behind the camera, always capturing, never faking. But Officer Sandoval paused on one picture. It was from a picnic. Jacob sitting on my shoulders, grinning wildly. Emily stood beside us, arms crossed, a strange tightness in her smile. "Where was this taken?" he asked. I told him, "Balboa Park." "June, you seem distant here," he said, looking at Emily. "Were you two fighting that day?" She blinked. "No, I was just tired." But I saw it now too. Her body leaned away from me. Her eyes didn't meet mine. At the time I hadn't noticed, or maybe I hadn't wanted to. Sandoval nodded and closed the folder. He said, "We'll be in touch." No warmth, no indication of what came next. Just a dismissal. Outside, the sun felt harsh. Emily lit a cigarette even though she had quit months ago. "Do you think it went okay?" she asked. I hesitated. "I think they're just doing their job." But I didn't believe it. I had seen doubt in that room. A shadow I couldn't explain. 2 weeks later, we got the letter. Denied. The reason? Insufficient evidence of a bona fide marriage. It felt like a slap across the face. Everything we had, every moment, every sacrifice, reduced to a technical rejection. I stared at the paper while Emily paced the kitchen. "This doesn't make sense. We gave them everything." I agreed, but there was a knot in my stomach that wouldn't untie. We went back to Clara, who reviewed the letter with a heavy sigh. "They're being stricter lately," she said, "especially with mixed-status couples. We can appeal, but it'll take time. You'll need more proof, anything that shows emotional intimacy. And we need to be honest about any inconsistencies." She paused and looked at Emily. "There's a line here about the child. The officer noted that Jacob's birth certificate doesn't list a father. That could raise questions." Emily's face went pale. "It's just an old form. I didn't want to include someone who abandoned us." Clara frowned. "Still, it opens the door for scrutiny. They may ask for a paternity test if they suspect anything." I looked at Emily, waiting for her to reassure us, to explain, but she just nodded. "Okay, we'll deal with it." No explanation, no emotion, just a wall. I didn't know what to make of it. That night, I found her sitting in the dark on the porch, a glass of wine untouched beside her. "You okay?" I asked. She didn't look at me. "I'm tired, Mateo. I thought this would be easier." I sat beside her. "We'll figure it out. We always do." She didn't answer, just whispered, "He's already been through enough." It was the way she said it. He, not Jacob, not our son. He, just like she was separating herself from the memory, or from me. The next day, I noticed she had locked her desk drawer. I never checked her things, but the lock was new. It stood out, like a wound trying to hide. And once you see something, you can't unsee it. I asked gently, "Everything okay at work?" She nodded too quickly. "Yeah, just papers I need to sort through." Her smile was hollow, and for the first time, I felt like I was living with a stranger wearing Emily's face. Clara called us back to sign the appeal. "We need to add more affidavits," she said. "Friends, family, anyone who can vouch for your relationship." But when I asked Emily to contact her sister, she hesitated. "We're not that close anymore," she said. I offered to ask co-workers. She shrugged. "Maybe. I'll think about it." There was a distance growing between us, like she was preparing to let go. Then came the night I found the envelope. It was hidden between cookbooks in the kitchen. A faded legal envelope, marked private. Curiosity burned through my guilt. I opened it. Inside were documents, hospital records, a birth certificate, Jacob's, no father listed, and a letter, handwritten. The ink smudged in places, like tears had fallen over it. It read, "Emily, I know this isn't what we planned, but I can't be involved. My position, it's too public. If this ever got out, it would destroy everything I've worked for. You'll be fine. You're strong. Please don't contact me again. DW." I stared at those initials. DW. The name echoed in my mind like a warning. David Whitmore, judge. The name on our rejection letter. The same man who had denied our case. And just like that, the pieces began to rearrange themselves. When your heart has been broken by someone you trusted completely, it changes you. It teaches you to question everything. If you've ever discovered something that shattered your world in an instant, I'd like to hear from you. Leave your story in the comments. And if this is the kind of truth you believe deserves a voice, consider subscribing. Every time you share or comment, you're helping someone feel less alone. Sometimes it's not the enemies we fear most. It's the secrets of the ones we love. The letters sat on the table like a quiet threat. White envelope, government seal, my name printed in bold black letters that seemed heavier than paper should allow. I didn't open it right away. Emily had placed it there with trembling hands, eyes red from crying. "It came this morning," she whispered. I nodded but didn't touch it. My instinct told me what it said. I just wasn't ready to read it. When I finally did, the words blurred before my eyes. Notice to appear. Court hearing scheduled. Judge assigned. Grounds for deportation. They didn't ask. They told. A list of expectations and consequences delivered without warmth or warning. 30 days to prepare. No appeal granted unless new evidence emerged. No more extensions. Emily sat across from me, clutching her coffee like it was her anchor. "We can fight this," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. I had seen her determination before, fierce and raw. This wasn't that. This was fear pretending to be hope. Our lawyer Clara was quiet as she scanned the letter. Her brows knit together in that way that meant something was wrong, deeper than what she could say aloud in front of Jacob. "Judge assigned is David R. Whitmore," she finally said. The name echoed inside me. D.W., the same initials from the letter in the envelope. The letter I wasn't supposed to find. I didn't say anything. Not then, not in front of them. But my hands went cold, my throat tightened. Judge Whitmore, the man responsible for my removal from the country, the man Emily once knew well enough for him to write her a private letter, asking to erase their connection. I could feel the truth pressing against the inside of my skull, screaming to be let out, but I kept quiet. One wrong word, and everything would fall apart. Before I was ready, I needed to see him. I needed to look into the eyes of the man who judged my life and decide if what I feared was true. The courthouse was a towering structure of glass and steel, impersonal, designed to intimidate, the kind of place that reminded you, even before entering, that justice does not always mean fairness. I walked through the metal detector with my head down, heart pounding, hands clenched so tightly my knuckles ached. Emily walked beside me, Jacob asleep in her arms. I looked at them and wondered how many more days I had with them. We sat in the courtroom waiting for our case to be called. Families surrounded us, mothers with crying babies, fathers in suits too large or too small. The silence was heavy. You could hear people breathing. No one smiled. The clerk called my name and I stood, legs trembling, eyes scanning the room. Then I saw him. Judge David Whitmore entered through the side door, his robe flowing, his expression unreadable. He looked older than I expected. Gray hair neatly combed, jaw tense, posture perfect. But it was his eyes that struck me, cold, calculated. And when he looked at me, for a split second, I saw it. Recognition, a flicker of something. Not surprise, not fear, just a shadow that crossed his face and vanished just as quickly. He did not acknowledge me beyond the formalities, did not look at Emily, did not glance at Jacob. He read from the file as if it were the first time he had seen my name, but I knew better. And deep down, I knew he did too. The government attorney presented their case. I had entered the country unlawfully. I had overstayed. I had violated the conditions. My presence, they claimed, was no longer justified. No mention of my family. No mention of the child I had raised since diapers. Just statutes and codes and reasons to disappear me. Clara stood next. She spoke clearly, with passion, listing my contributions, my clean record, my work history, the taxes I had paid, the community I had served. She handed over letters from employers, neighbors, even the priest from our local church. All spoke of me as a man of character, a father, a husband, someone who had earned his place. Then she paused. "Your Honor, we also present new information regarding potential conflict of interest." My breath caught. Emily froze. Clara continued. "It has come to our attention that there may be a personal relationship between this court and the petitioner's spouse, specifically regarding prior correspondence related to the biological father of the minor child, Jacob." The courtroom went still. Whitmore did not react. His expression hardened. If that was even possible. He asked, "Is this a formal motion for recusal?" Clara nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. We request a reassignment on grounds of bias." Whitmore tapped his pen once, twice, then leaned forward. "This court has no personal relationship with any party involved," he said, each word measured. "The letter in question is not legally relevant. There is no evidence of bias that would impede my ability to make a fair ruling." Then he turned to me. "Mr. Vargas, you may speak, if you wish." I stood. My legs barely obeyed. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear my own voice. "Your Honor," I said, "I don't want special treatment. I just want to be allowed to stay with my family, to keep raising the boy I love. That's all." He stared at me. No emotion, no crack in the armor. Then he said, "I will issue my ruling within business 7 days. This hearing is adjourned." And just like that, it was over. No answers, no apologies, just silence. Outside the courthouse, the air felt too thick. Emily refused to look at me. I turned to her. "How long have you known he was the father?" She said nothing. Her lips parted slightly, then closed. The truth was there, sitting just beneath the surface. But she wasn't ready. Or maybe she never would be. Sometimes silence is the loudest confession. If you've ever stood in front of someone with power over your life and felt completely invisible, I want you to know you're not alone. This space is for you. Drop a comment below and let your voice be heard. And if these stories speak to you, consider subscribing. Here, your truth matters. The weight of secrets can crush a man long before a verdict ever does. The night after the hearing, the house felt colder than usual. Not because of the weather, but because something between us had shifted in a way that couldn't be undone. Emily barely spoke on the drive home. Her hands clenched the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping her from unraveling. I didn't ask any more questions. I didn't need to. Her silence had already spoken louder than any words could. Jacob was asleep when we got home, curled up on the couch with his stuffed elephant tucked under his arm. I stood over him for a long time, listening to the soft rhythm of his breath. This little boy, who called me daddy, who clung to my shirt when he was scared, who believed I could fix anything, had no idea how fragile the ground beneath our feet had become. Emily said she needed air and stepped outside. I stayed back, alone in the living room, feeling the weight of something invisible pressing down on my chest. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I found myself walking to the spare room. It used to be our office, filled with boxes and papers and half-finished plans. The desk drawer that was always locked was now slightly open. Hesitated. My hand trembled as I reached for it. Part of me knew I shouldn't look, but another part, the part already broken, needed to know. Inside the drawer was a small cardboard box, taped on the sides and labeled only with the word MISC. I pulled it out slowly, set it on the desk, and opened it. The first thing I saw was a folded baby blanket, yellow and worn. It smelled faintly of lavender and something older, something like memory. Beneath it were hospital wristbands, tiny socks, and a few old photographs, and at the bottom, a manila envelope with my name written on the front in shaky cursive. I opened it, expecting more immigration documents, maybe receipts or legal forms. What I found instead was a single sheet of paper, a letter. The handwriting was unfamiliar, sharp and confident, like someone who was used to signing their name on decisions that changed people's lives. Emily, I know this isn't what either of us expected, but I can't be involved. My career, my position, everything I've built would be at risk. I need you to understand. I'm not walking away because I don't care. I'm walking away because I have to. You are strong. You'll raise him well. Please do not contact me again. I wish you peace. D. Whitmore. I stared at the signature for a long time. D. Whitmore. My mind screamed. My body went still. The judge. The man who had sat across from me in that courtroom, who had ruled on my deportation with cold detachment, who had refused to recuse himself, who had looked me in the eye and pretended not to know me, was the same man who had written this letter, the same man who had fathered the boy I had raised for years. I couldn't breathe. My hands shook. The letter slipped from my fingers and fluttered to the floor like a dead bird. I sank to my knees, gripping the edge of the desk, my heart pounding in my ears. Rage didn't come, not right away. What came first was disbelief, then betrayal, and finally, a sorrow so deep it felt like drowning I thought of every moment I had held Jacob, fed him, bathed him, sang him to sleep. I remembered the nights he cried from nightmares, and the mornings he jumped into my arms before school. I remembered Emily's smile, the way she looked at me like I had saved them. All of it, every second, was now tainted by the truth she had kept hidden. She came back inside and saw me sitting on the floor with the letter beside me. Her face paled. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her eyes said everything. How long? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. She swallowed. Since before I met you. And he knew? She nodded slowly. He didn't want anything to do with us. He said if I ever told anyone, it could ruin him, his marriage, his seat on the bench, his entire life. But what about mine? I asked. What about Jacob's? What about the truth? Tears welled in her eyes, but I was too far gone to feel sympathy. She stepped toward me, but I backed away. I needed space. I needed to breathe. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the porch, watching the streetlights flicker, thinking about everything I had given up to build this life. I thought about Julio, the boy who died crossing the desert, about my mother in Michoacan, who still thought I was making a better life here. I thought about all the men and women I had seen be torn from their families, because someone decided their existence wasn't legal enough. And now, the man who held that power over me, the man who decided I should be deported, had once whispered promises to the woman I loved and left her with a child he didn't want. And I had unknowingly stepped into his place, raising his son, protecting his secret, while he sat in courtrooms pretending to be just. Justice had never felt so distant. If you've ever discovered something that changed your entire reality, if someone you trusted once used your love to hide the truth, I want to hear from you. Share your story in the comments. And if this space gives you even a little comfort in your own struggle, I'd be grateful if you subscribed. Together, we make sure that silence does not win. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. Sometimes it shatters everything you've ever believed. For 3 days, I didn't say a word to Emily. We moved around the house like ghosts, careful not to collide, not to look each other too long in the eyes. Jacob felt the shift. Kids always do. He stopped laughing, stopped asking for bedtime stories. He'd crawl into my lap quietly and just rest his head against my chest like he was trying to hold the family together with his silence. I kept going to work, cutting lawns, trimming hedges, fixing sprinklers, pretending to be okay, pretending not to be unraveling. I thought maybe the routine would save me, that if I just kept moving, I wouldn't feel the betrayal poisoning everything I had built. But every time I looked at my phone and saw Jacob's face smiling back at me from the lock screen, it twisted something inside me. I started asking questions, quietly, carefully. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for the truth. I needed to understand how deep the lie went. I called a friend of mine, a man I had worked with years ago who now did freelance tech work. I asked him if there was any way to find digital records tied to a judge's private life. Not to hack, just to search. Public databases, leaks, anything. He hesitated at first. "That's dangerous ground, man," he said. "People like him, they don't leave trails, but I'll see what I can do." 2 days later, he called me back. He had found an archived article from a local law journal dated 10 years earlier, a profile piece on up-and-coming judges in the state. It mentioned David Whitmore. It talked about his Ivy League education, his rapid climb in the court system, his perfect family, his wife, a prominent real estate attorney, 2 daughters, no mention of a son, no mention of Emily, but it did mention something else. A closed-door ethics, hearing from 9 years ago, sealed, no public record of the outcome. But the timing matched exactly with Jacob's birth. My heart began to race. I printed the article and brought it to Clara. She read it carefully, her fingers tapping the desk with growing tension. "This doesn't prove anything," she said, "but it shows a pattern. If there was an ethics review around the time your stepson was born, and it involved Judge Whitmore, then we may be able to argue he should have recused himself on the grounds of undisclosed personal interest." I nodded. "He didn't just know Emily. He had a relationship with her. He is Jacob's biological father." Clara looked at me. "Are you sure you want to go public with this? It will explode. Court, the media, maybe even your safety." I didn't hesitate. He tried to erase us, but he forgot something. "I'm not afraid of being seen anymore." We filed a formal motion for judicial misconduct and conflict of interest. Within 48 hours, the case was flagged by a local news station that had been following deportation stories in our district. They called me, asked for an interview. At first I said no. I didn't want Jacob to see his life turned into headlines. But then I remembered all the nights I had held that boy and promised him I would never leave. And I knew silence was no longer an option. The interview aired on a Thursday night. They blurred my face, changed my voice slightly, but the truth was clear. A respected immigration judge had fathered a child with a woman whose husband he later sentenced for deportation, all while hiding the relationship and refusing to step down from the case. The fallout was instant. By morning, protesters stood outside the courthouse holding signs that said things like, "Justice is not selective, and judges are not gods." Immigration activists called for a formal investigation. Anonymous tips began flooding local media outlets. And then, someone leaked the original letter Whitmore had written to Emily. Equate handwriting, the signature, the truth. The letter went viral. Whitmore released a statement through his lawyer denying any wrongdoing, claiming he had no memory of the letter and that any relationship with Emily was brief and irrelevant to his judicial conduct. But people weren't buying it. Emily, who had avoided every reporter until that moment, finally spoke. Not for herself, for Jacob. She held a press conference in front of our apartment building. With tears in her eyes, she said, "I made mistakes. I kept secrets. But Mateo has been the only father Jacob has ever known. He did not deserve to be punished for my past or for someone else's shame." That clip was shared over 2 million times in one weekend. Clara contacted the Office of Judicial Review. A full investigation was opened. The judge was placed on administrative leave, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to hope. But with exposure comes risk. We started getting letters, some supportive, some filled with hate. Messages that said I was trying to destroy a good man's career, that I was lying to stay in a country I didn't belong to, that I should go back to where I came from. One message, sent to Emily's email, included a photo of our apartment with the words, "Your time is up." I reported it to the police. They said they would look into it, but their eyes said otherwise. We were on our own, so I did what I had always done. I protected my family. I changed our routines. I took Jacob to school. Myself, I installed a camera by the front door. I stopped leaving at night. I became a wall, but I also became something else, a man who refused to disappear. If you've ever had to fight against someone more powerful just to protect what little you have, if you've ever been made to feel small in a world that ignores your pain, I want you to know this space is yours too. Leave a comment. Let your voice echo where others tried to silence you. And if you believe stories like these deserve to be heard, subscribe, and be part of the movement. Because none of us should have to carry the weight of injustice alone. Sometimes, telling the truth is not about courage. It is about survival. From the moment the reporter's voice came through the phone, I knew things had shifted irrevocably. I was standing in the kitchen, Jacob's lunchbox in one hand, a calendar of my work shifts in the other. When I heard, "We'd like to interview you about your case," my breath froze. For years, I had hidden behind the cardboard walls, worked without complaint, sent money home, felt invisible in a land that claimed to embrace dreams, yet ignored my existence. Now a lens was pointing at me. Now a voice wanted to amplify my story. I said yes, not because I craved attention, but because the story had to be told. As if I stayed silent, I realized I'd already been complicit in my own erasure. I agreed to the interview and walked into the studio hours later, wearing the clothes I always wore. Worn jeans, a faded blue shirt, dirt still under my fingernails from the hedgerow I trimmed that morning. The journalist asked about my work, my life here, and for a moment, everything stopped. I described the day I crossed into the United States, the blood on my shoes, the fear in my lungs. Then I described how I found Jacob and Emily, how I wrapped that boy in my arms and called him mine, even though legally he was not. The camera caught my hands shaking slightly when I said, "Papi," one Sunday morning, and he called me that for the first time. The next segment was the bombshell. They showed the letter, the one addressed to Emily, the one signed D. Whitmore, the handwriting clear, the envelope marked private. They flashed it on the screen and paused. Millions of viewers saw a judge's initials and a mother's secret laid bare in black and white. I saw the impact in the studio. Jaws dropped, lights bright. The journalist leaned forward and said, "Can you believe what this means?" I nodded. I already had. When that night's broadcast ended, I drove home in silence. The highway lights blurred through the windshield. I thought about the man sleeping in the back seat, Jacob, curled in his car seat, oblivious to the storm swirling around him. I thought about the yard I had mowed that afternoon, the house I had cleaned after, the meals I had cooked, all of it now framed by a truth I did not ask for, but could not deny. I parked, turned off the engine, sat for minutes, windows open to let autumn air fill the small car. I whispered to Jacob as I unbuckled him, "You are safe. I am here." And I meant it. The newsroom stories erupted. Headlines like, "Judge embroiled in secret paternity scandal," or "Immigrant father fights for his family and justice," spread across networks and social media. I watched comments fly. What did he know? How many others? Justice for the man who raised the child. Some messages were kind, many were not. "Go home," one said. "You are not an American. We're
Another.
others too." But there, You did the right thing. This family deserves truth. I read every message. Each one reminded me how visible I had become, something I had tried to avoid since I stepped into this country. To stay invisible, stay safe. Emily emerged from hiding. She stood in front of the cameras with Jacob in her arms. Her voice cracked, but she spoke with clarity. I made mistakes, she said. I kept secrets, but Mateo has been the only father my son has ever known. He did not deserve to be punished for my past or for someone else's shame. I watched the clip on my phone. My heart thumped in my chest. I saw Jacob's head leaning against my shoulder from the living room footage of earlier that week. That image merged with hers on the screen. Parenthood in all its messy, complicated beauty. My lawyer called and said the motion had been officially logged with the court. The allegation of judicial misconduct, the request for recusal, the internal investigation into Judge Whitmore's past. The wheels turned slowly. Now they turned. I felt something in me that I had suppressed. Hope, a fragile thing, yes, but real. Then the threats started. Anonymous letters slipped under our door at night. One declared, "Your time is up." Another photo of our front step. I reported them to the police, got a case number, but no comfort. I changed our routes. I held Jacob's hand everywhere we went. I watched Emily once push a stroller through the park and glance over her shoulder. I saw her, fear, and I held her tighter. I made a promise, silently. I will protect you. I will not allow you to become another casualty of someone else's lie. In the weeks that followed, I began to see something shift in the community around us. Neighbors I had barely spoken to knocked on our door and offered casseroles, ride shares, help with babysitting. Church members invited us to speak at next week's service. One day, a young man stopped me in the grocery store and said quietly, "You have more courage than most of us." I thanked him, but inside I thought, courage is not me. Courage is truth. And truth had finally found a voice. Sometimes when I tuck Jacob into bed, I catch myself watching his face, memorizing that small upturn of lips, the way he scrunches his nose when he laughs. I wonder how much longer we will stand in the storm. But in that moment, I can see our future. Not guaranteed, not safe yet, but ours. If you've ever felt like the world stacked every chance against you and someone, held the power to write your destiny, I invite you now to speak your truth. Leave a comment, tell your story, and if these walls of story help you believe you are seen, consider subscribing. Because here, every voice matters, even those society insists don't. Now, the fight is no longer just for me. It is for the boy who wakes up calling me Poppy, for the woman who put her faith in me, for the love that refused to be erased. The sound of my alarm clock at 5 a.m. was always the same, shrill, indifferent, a reminder that even when the world is falling apart, time doesn't pause. That morning was no different. I got up, washed my face in silence, and stared into the mirror like I was looking for something familiar. But the man who looked back at me had changed. My skin felt heavier, not just from exhaustion, but from the weight of carrying truths too long kept in the dark. The kitchen smelled of coffee and toasted bread. Emily stood near the sink, her eyes distant, her lips moving, silently, probably rehearsing what she'd say next to the reporters camped outside our building. Jacob was eating cereal, one foot swinging from the chair, humming softly to himself. That little sound, that innocent melody, grounded me in the present. I kissed the top of his head. He smiled up at me with milk on his chin. "Are you working today, Poppy?" I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, buddy, but I'll be back before dinner." I wasn't sure that was true. Lately, nothing felt certain. When I left the apartment, I saw a woman standing near the gate, holding a clipboard. At first, I thought she was from immigration. My chest tightened. But then, I noticed her badge, Child Welfare Services. My blood ran cold. She smiled politely, but her eyes were full of practiced detachment. "Mr. Vargas, I'd like to ask you a few questions about your son." That word, son. She said it so easily, as if it belonged to anyone who claimed it. I nodded and led her back inside. She sat on the edge, legs crossed, pen poised above her clipboard. Emily looked at me, terrified. I sat down across from the woman and waited. "We've received a report," she began, "about the safety of Jacob. This is standard procedure, nothing to worry about, but we do need to follow up." My fists clenched under the table. "A report from who?" She didn't answer. "Anonymous." she said. It happens often during high-profile cases. We just need to ensure Jacob's environment is stable. Emily handed her school records, vaccination logs, photos of Jacob playing soccer, his drawings on the fridge. I watched as the woman skimmed through them without emotion. Then she looked at me. Do you consider yourself his legal father? The question cut deeper than expected. I answered quietly. I consider myself his only father. She made a note. Has there been a DNA test to confirm biological parentage? My stomach turned. Emily sat still as stone. I answered again. No, but he is mine. She nodded, stood up, and we'll be in touch. Thank you for your time. And just like that, she walked out, leaving the weight of doubt behind her like a shadow. That night, I sat by Jacob's bed longer than usual. He asked me to tell him the story again, the one about the baby bear who couldn't find his cave and wandered through the forest asking every tree if they remembered him. I changed the ending this time. I told him the baby bear wasn't lost. He was just looking for the place that already held his name. Emily came into the room after he fell asleep. She sat down beside me. Her eyes were tired, swollen from holding back too much for too long. What if they take him? She whispered. I shook my head. They won't. But even as I said it, I felt the ground beneath us shifting again. 2 days later, our lawyer called. The judicial panel had made a decision, not about my deportation, about Whitmore. The judge had been officially suspended pending a full investigation. His previous rulings involving potential conflicts were now under review. Some would be overturned, some would be reopened. Clara's voice trembled slightly when she said, "This is big. This has never happened before in our district. Mateo, you started something, but starting something and surviving it are two different things." The court rescheduled my hearing. A new judge would be assigned, a neutral one, someone with no ties, but the damage had already been done. My case had been poisoned from the beginning. The truth was a matter of record, but the system doesn't heal overnight, and we were running out of time. We filed an emergency request for a stay of removal. We attached all supporting documents, news coverage, community testimonials, proof of public interest. Still, no answer. We waited each day like prisoners staring through a slot in the door, hoping for news. I went to Jacob's school play. He was the sun in a story about weather. He wore a yellow paper crown and beamed so brightly, I thought my chest would burst. After the show, he ran into my arms. "Did I do good, Poppy?" I smiled. "You did perfect." I held him for too long, and when I let go, I had to wipe my eyes before he could see. That night, I found a letter in our mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single line written in capital letters. "You do not deserve him." There was no signature, just malice wrapped in cowardice. I stared at the words for a long time. Then I ripped the paper in half, over and over. Nothing but tiny fragments scattered across the kitchen table. I refused to let hate write the story of my fatherhood. If you've ever had someone question your worth, your right to love, or your right to stay, I want you to know you are not alone. Your truth matters here. Leave your story in the comments. And if these moments echo something in your heart, subscribe. Not because we have all the answers, but because sometimes being seen is the first step toward healing. No one gets to tell me who I am to the boy I raised with my hands, with my heart, and with every breath I have left. The morning of the new hearing, the sky was gray, almost metallic, the kind of sky that makes you feel like the world itself is holding its breath. I dressed carefully, pressing my shirt with shaky hands, making sure my shoes were clean, not because I thought it mattered to the court, but because I needed to feel like I still had some control over something. Emily braided Jacob's hair that day, even though it was already neat. She said it helped her feel grounded. We both needed rituals to survive what was coming. The courthouse looked the same from the outside, but felt like a completely different battlefield. This time, I wasn't walking into the unknown. I was walking into a place where the walls already knew my name. The guards nodded. The receptionist offered a quiet, "Good luck." The silence in the waiting area wasn't just fear, it was expectation. The kind you feel before a verdict, before a storm, before a truth that cannot be undone. Our new judge was a woman named Evelyn Ramirez, a woman of color, immigrant daughter. Her file said she graduated top of her class and had a reputation for fairness. But I didn't let myself hope too quickly. Fairness in theory often feels different when you're the one being judged. Clara sat beside me, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder before we stood. The courtroom wasn't full, but the tension made it feel crowded. Emily sat in the back row, Jacob on her lap, small hands gripping her fingers. I looked at him and found my reason again. Judge Ramirez asked for statements. The government repeated the same cold script they had used months earlier. Visa overstay, violation of federal code, no adjustment of status available, no exemption, no anchor relative, no path. Clara stood, and her voice didn't tremble once. She presented our case as more than a list of facts. She painted a picture of a father, a child, a lie that nearly destroyed a family. She brought up the prior misconduct, the sealed ethics hearing, the letter. She didn't attack, she illuminated. And then she said something I will never forget. She said, "Your Honor, this man is not asking for charity. He is asking for recognition, for a system that so often hides behind paperwork and procedure to finally look up and see the human being standing before it. He is not perfect, but he is present. And in the life of a child, that is everything." Judge Ramirez asked me if I stood slowly. My knees were weak, but my voice, somehow, was not. I came to this country with nothing but the hope that I could build a life that meant something. I broke a law to stay. I understand that. But I did not break faith with the boy who calls me father. I raised him. I protected him. I taught him to tell the truth, even when it's hard. That's what I'm doing now, telling the truth. I do not have a legal claim to him, but love is not legal. It is documented. It is not conditional. It is earned every single day. There was a long silence after I spoke. No one moved. Even the government attorney looked away. Judge Ramirez nodded once and said, "I will take this matter under advisement. A written decision will be issued in 10 days. 10 days. We walked out of that courthouse like survivors of a shipwreck, still afloat, but soaked and shivering. The reporters outside snapped photos. Emily pulled her coat tighter around Jacob. I placed my hand on his head, not sure if I was shielding him or grounding myself. I looked at Clara and asked, "Did we do enough?" She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "We told the truth. Sometimes that has to be enough." Back home, I tried to resume our normal rhythm. Work, dinner, homework, bedtime stories. But nothing felt normal. Each day was measured in heartbeats and unopened envelopes. On the 7th night, I dreamed I was at a train station, holding Jacob's hand. But the ticket booth kept asking for a name I didn't recognize. And no matter how many times I repeated mine, the conductor kept saying, "You don't belong here." I woke up gasping. Emily held my face in her hands. "You do belong," she whispered. "You do." 2 days later, the letter came. The same government seal, the same heavy paper. I stared at it on the table, exactly where the first one had been. Only this time, my hands didn't tremble when I picked it up. Judge Ramirez's decision was clear. The court recognized the failure of judicial impartiality in the original hearing. The motion for a new ruling was granted. My deportation order was officially vacated. I was no longer required to leave the country. But it wasn't just legal relief. In her final paragraph, Judge Ramirez wrote, "This court acknowledges the extraordinary circumstances surrounding this case and the undeniable evidence of a sustained parental bond between Mr. Vargas and the minor child. While legal adoption proceedings fall outside this ruling, the court strongly recommends the appropriate agencies consider this relationship in all future determinations." I read that line over and over. I was not just a man who avoided deportation. I was a father who had been seen. When I told Jacob, he smiled and said, "So you're not going anywhere?" And I said, "No, buddy, I'm right here." He ran into my arms, laughing, and I held him as tight as I could, like I could squeeze the years of fear out of our skin. Emily cried in the hallway, silent tears. She didn't say anything, and she didn't need to. In that moment, everything had changed. If you've ever waited for someone in power to finally see your humanity, if you've ever stood in front of a system built to crush you and dared to speak anyway, then this story is yours too. Share your experience in the comments. Let it be heard. And if you believe more voices need to rise above the silence, subscribe, because every time you show up here, you remind the world that truth does not belong to the powerful, it belongs to the brave. The weeks that followed were strange in their quietness. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't waking up to dread. No court dates, no reporters, no shadow of deportation hanging over my head. But even peace can feel unfamiliar after living in survival mode for so long. I would still check the mail every day, expecting another blow. I still flinched at unknown numbers calling my phone. Healing doesn't begin the moment the war ends. It begins when you allow yourself to believe it might not return tomorrow. Jacob's laughter came back first, loud, uninhibited, the kind that fills a room and leaks under the door. He started drawing again too, pictures of our family, stick figures with wild hair and crooked smiles. But in every picture now, I was in the center, always. In some, I was holding a big shield. In others, he drew me flying. I asked him once what I was doing in the drawings. He said, "Saving us." Quieter. Emily was. She moved like someone trying not to wake a house that had only just stopped burning. We talked more now, but not always about the past. Sometimes just about the present. Groceries, school pickups, the smell of rain. There was something tender about the way she looked at me now. A kind of apology that didn't need words. A kind of respect that had grown in the fire we barely survived. Then one morning, Clara called again. This time she sounded lighter. She said a community advocacy group had contacted her. They wanted me to speak at a local town hall about immigration reform. At first, I laughed. Me? Landscaper? A former undocumented man standing behind a podium? I didn't think I had anything left to say. But Clara insisted. You lived through what most people only see in headlines. That makes your voice one of the most important in the room. I said yes, not because I felt ready, but because I owed it to everyone who didn't get a second chance. Julio, my cousin Andres, the mother I met at the shelter, whose baby was taken at the border. I carried all of them with me as I walked into that church basement where the town hall was held. The room was small, maybe 50 people, a few politicians, local leaders, teachers, students. I stood behind the microphone and looked down at my notes. But then I looked up, saw their faces, and set the paper aside. I told them about the desert, about the heat that cracked your lips until they bled, about crossing with a photo of your mother sewn into your socks in case your body was found. I told them about the courtroom, about the judge who was more than just a stranger. I told them about Jacob, and I said something I hadn't even admitted to myself before. I said, I used to think survival meant keeping your head down, but survival is not silence. Survival is standing up, even when your legs shake. After I spoke, there was a silence in the room. Not the kind that comes from disinterest, the kind that comes when truth lands like a stone in the chest. Then came the applause, slow at first, then swelling. A man in the front row stood up and said, "You just gave a face to what we pretend not to see." That night, I received more hugs from strangers than I had in my entire life. Things started changing in our community. Small things, but meaningful. The school began offering workshops in Spanish for immigrant parents. The local clinic started an outreach program for undocumented families who needed prenatal care. My story didn't spark a revolution, but it made people look around. That's sometimes all it takes to start something real. At home, Jacob started asking questions, big ones, like why some kids had two daddies, or why I had an accent, or what the word undocumented really meant. I answered each one honestly, not always perfectly, but with heart. I told him, being undocumented didn't mean I was invisible. It meant I was trying to live in a place that hadn't made space for me yet. He nodded like he understood, even if he didn't fully. Kids carry more wisdom than we give them credit for. I also started writing, not a book, just thoughts. Letters to my younger self, letters to Jacob in the future, letters to the version of me that almost gave up. Writing became a place where I could breathe without fear, where I could reclaim parts of my story that had been taken or hidden for too long. I didn't know if I would ever share them, but they felt like seeds, and maybe one day they'd bloom. Emily and I took Jacob to the beach the following weekend. It was windy and the ocean was loud, but Jacob screamed with joy as the waves chased his feet. Emily and I stood back, watching him. She reached for my hand and said, "We're not the same people we were a year ago." I nodded. Thank God for that. That night, Jacob fell asleep with sand still in his hair and a sunburn blooming across his cheeks. I watched him for a long time, feeling the kind of peace that doesn't come from winning, but from surviving, from knowing you didn't disappear, even when the world tried to erase you. If you've ever come out the other side of something that nearly broke you, if you've found your strength in the pieces you put back together, I see you. Leave your truth in the comments. And if you want to walk with stories that remind you of your power, hit subscribe. This space is for the survivors, the fighters, and the ones who chose to stay. It was a Wednesday morning when I got the call. Clara's voice was calm, but carried an edge I hadn't heard in weeks. She told me there had been a development, not with my case directly, but with Whitmore. The Office of Judicial Review had concluded its investigation. The findings were to be made public, and what they uncovered went far beyond my story. It turned out I had not been the only person affected by his decisions. There were others, other families, other cases where his rulings showed patterns of quiet bias, subtle abuses of discretion. A woman whose asylum case he denied, while privately owning shares in the company she had accused of abuse. A man whose testimony was cut off mid-sentence, while Whitmore checked his phone under the bench. Stories buried under layers of legal language, but they were now surfacing like bones in a drought. Clara sent me a link to the public report. I opened it slowly, my hands cold despite the warmth in the room. Page after page of misconduct, of ethical violations, of human lives reduced to footnotes. My name was mentioned in Section 14. My case was referenced as the tipping point, the exposure that led to the unraveling. There was a picture of him, too, smiling in a courthouse hallway, arms crossed, a professional portrait. I stared at it, trying to match that image with the man who had refused to look me in the eye while sentencing me to disappear. He looked small now, smaller than I remembered, and I realized it wasn't his power that had once made him seem larger than life. It was my fear. He resigned that same week. No press conference, no apology, just a typed letter filed quietly. But his name would not fade easily, not from my story, not from Jacob's. That night, Emily and I talked for a long time. We sat at the kitchen table after Jacob had gone to sleep, the light dim, the window open just enough to let in the evening air. She said, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if none of this came out?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "I think about it every day, because in another timeline, I would be gone, deported, disconnected, just a memory to Jacob, slowly fading like a photograph left in the sun." But that didn't happen, because we fought, because the truth, when spoken loud enough, can fracture even the tallest walls. Emily looked at me and asked the question I had avoided for weeks. "Do you hate me for what happened?" I looked into her eyes and saw the weight she still carried, the shame, the guilt. I shook my head. No, hated the silence. But now, we are louder than that silence ever was. She cried quietly, not the kind of sobbing that shakes a body, the kind that leaks slowly, gently, like water from a hairline crack. I reached across the table and held her hand. For the first time in months, we weren't two people surviving separately. We were one family, rebuilding together. A few days later, I received an invitation from a university in the next state. They were hosting a symposium on ethics in immigration, law, and wanted me to speak. I laughed when I read it. Me, the man who once mowed their lawns, now asked to speak in their lecture halls. But I accepted, because sometimes the best way to honor pain is to turn it into education. At the event, I told my story again. But this time, I framed it differently. Not as a victim's account, but as a father's journey, as a man's transformation. I talked about how systems fail not because they are flawed by design, but because they are run by people who forget the faces behind the files. After I spoke, a young law student came up to me. He said, "I've been struggling with whether I belong here, whether I can make a difference. Listening to you made me feel like I do." That sentence stuck with me, because sometimes the greatest impact we have is the one we never planned to make. At home, things felt lighter. Jacob was doing well in school. He won a small award for a story he wrote about a superhero who used love instead of powers. When he brought the certificate home, he handed it to me and said, "You're the real superhero, Poppy." I smiled and said, "Only because I have the best sidekick." We celebrated with pizza and too much soda. That night, Jacob fell asleep on the couch with a comic book on his chest. Emily and I carried him to bed together. We stood in his doorway for a while, not speaking, just watching him breathe, that quiet, steady rhythm of a child at peace. It felt like the sound of victory. In the following weeks, I started getting letters from strangers, from families who had been afraid to speak up, from people who said my story gave them courage. Some were from immigrants, some were from judges. One letter ended with the words, "Your truth changed the way I see the world." I kept that one in my wallet. Every time I feel like the noise of the world is too much, I take it out and read it again. Because even when you don't know who is listening, someone always is. If your truth has ever felt too small to matter, if you've ever wondered whether your story could shift even a single heart, I am here to remind you it absolutely can. Share your story in the comments. Let this space be a place where your voice lands softly, safely, and with meaning. And if you believe stories can light paths in even the darkest places, subscribe, because here, every name, every fight, every step forward matters. There are some moments in life that leave no visible scars, but change you forever. Moments that do not announce their arrival with explosions, but instead arrive quietly, like a soft whisper that becomes a roaring wind. This story, my story, began with a whisper of hope and nearly ended in silence. But we're still here, not because everything worked out perfectly, but because we refused to stop walking forward, even when every step hurt. In the days after Whitmore's resignation, our lives began to stitch themselves back together, not with big, dramatic transformations, but with the small gestures that make up real healing. A handwritten note from a neighbor who once avoided us, now taped to our door, saying, "Thank you for standing up. You helped more people than you know." A group of local kids who asked Jacob if I could come speak at their school for career day. An immigration officer who reached out through Clara and said quietly, "Off the record, what you did, it mattered." I no longer look over my shoulder when walking home. I no longer live in fear of the knock at the door. My body still holds the memories of panic, the muscle tension that doesn't let go easily, the breath that pauses before every official envelope. But now, there is peace threaded through the panic. Now, there is softness where there used to be only survival. Jacob's drawings have changed too. He still draws us, but the colors are brighter. There's always sunshine now, trees, birds, the three of us holding hands. In his latest drawing, I have a cape again, but this time, we are all flying together. Emily started working again. She helps part-time at the community center, counseling young women who have survived difficult relationships. I watch her when she comes home, a light in her eyes I thought had gone forever. She speaks softer now, but her voice is stronger. That's what healing does. It makes space for your voice to return, not as an echo, but as something solid. One night, we sat outside on the small porch, a blanket wrapped around our shoulders, Jacob asleep inside. We listened to the crickets, to the occasional car passing by, to the calm that doesn't need explanation. Emily reached for my hand and said, "I never believed we would come out of this hole." I looked at her, the woman who once buried her truth so deep she nearly lost everything. And I said, "Maybe we're not whole yet, but we're healing, and that's enough." I began volunteering too. I joined a group that helps undocumented fathers navigate family court. I sit in rooms with men who speak with broken English, but whole hearts. Translate. I advocate. I remind them, you are not alone. And every time I say that, I feel it healing a part of me that once believed I was. The boy I raised now knows the truth. Not all the legal details, not yet, but enough. Enough to understand that love isn't about blood or paperwork. It's about staying, showing up, being there when the world says you don't belong. And I will keep showing up for him, for Emily, for every man, woman, and child who has ever felt like their existence was something to apologize for. To those of you who have walked this path with me through this story, thank you. Whether you came here looking for answers, for hope, or just for a reminder that pain can bloom into purpose, I am grateful you stayed. I'm grateful for every second you gave to hear not just what happened, but what it meant. This is not just my story anymore, it is ours. And if something in these words has stirred something in your soul, please leave a comment. Let us know. You were here. Let your voice ripple outward so that someone else may find comfort in your courage. If you haven't already, I invite you to subscribe, not for numbers, not for validation, but because this space was built for you, for the stories the world tries to forget, for the people still fighting, still hoping, still becoming. And as this video ends, another will appear on your screen. Click on it. Keep walking with us, because healing is not a destination, it's a journey. And this, here, is just the beginning of something beautiful. Thank you for listening. Thank you for believing. And thank you for helping us rewrite what love, justice, and family can truly mean.